The Galactic Council had seen many things in its 3,000 years of existence. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. They had watched stars die and new ones be born. They had catalogued over 10,000 intelligent species across the known universe, but they had never seen anything quite like this. Ambassador Crystal of the Vorthian Collective stood at the viewing platform of Station Prime, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence as he watched the human transport ship dock. The Vorthians were an ancient race, one of the founding members of the Council. They had lived for millennia and prided themselves on their wisdom and their ability to remain calm in any situation. But today, Crystal felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt curious. The humans were new to the galactic community. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, and they had joined the Council just 20 years past. In cosmic terms, they were infants. Their technology was primitive compared to most species. Their lifespans were laughably short. Their bodies were fragile and prone to disease. By all logical measures, they should have been nothing special. But the humans had brought something with them, something that had caught the attention of every species in the known galaxy. They had brought dogs. Crystal watched as the transport bay doors opened. A human woman stepped out first, wearing the standard gray uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. She was young by human standards, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back from her face. Behind her walked a creature that made Crystal's hearts beat faster. It was a dog, a golden retriever, the humans called this type. It had fur the color of sunset and eyes that seemed to hold the warmth of a small sun. It walked beside the woman without any restraint or leash, matching her pace perfectly. When she stopped, it stopped. When she moved, it moved. It was as if they were connected by some invisible thread. The woman noticed Crystal watching and smiled. She walked toward him with the dog at her side. "Ambassador Crystal," she said, offering the traditional Vorthian greeting of pressing her palm to her chest. "I am Sarah Chen, Earth's new cultural liaison, and this is Max." The dog looked up at Crystal. Its tail began to move back and forth in a motion the humans called wagging. There was no fear in its eyes, no hesitation, only warmth and something that Crystal could only describe as welcome. "You bring the animal with you to official business?" Crystal asked. His translator device rendered his words in the human language. "Max goes everywhere with me," Sarah said. "He's my companion." Had heard this word before, companion. The humans used it often when speaking of these creatures, but he did not fully understand what it meant. "Your species keeps many animals," Crystal said. "Cats, birds, fish. Why are dogs different?" Sarah knelt down and put her hand on Max's head. The dog leaned into her touch, its eyes closing in what looked like pure contentment. "Dogs chose us," Sarah said. "Thousands of years ago, before humans had cities or writing or any of the things that make a civilization, wolves began to follow our ancestors. They ate the scraps from our fires. They warned us when danger was near. And over time, they changed. They became dogs. They became part of us." "A mutual arrangement for survival," Crystal said. "Many species have such partnerships." "It started that way," Sarah agreed, "but it became something more. Dogs don't stay with us because they have to. They stay because they want to. They love us, and we love them." Crystal's translator struggled with that last word. Love. It was a concept that existed in Vorthian culture, but it was reserved for mates and offspring, not for creatures of another species entirely. "Come," Sarah said, "let me show you." She led Crystal through the station corridors, Max padding softly beside her. They passed other species going about their business. A group of Telaxi traders, their blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights. A pair of Gromath engineers, their massive bodies taking up most of the hallway. A family of Silivics, the small insectoid beings moving in their characteristic cluster formation. Every single one of them stopped to look at Max. The Telaxi pointed and whispered among themselves. The Gromath actually stepped aside to let the dog pass, their usually stern faces softening. The Silivics' children broke from their cluster and approached, their antennae twitching with curiosity. Max greeted each of them with the same gentle enthusiasm. He let the Silivics' children touch his fur. He sat patiently while the Gromath bent down to examine him more closely. He wagged his tail at the Telaxi, who laughed in their bubbling way. "How does he know to behave this way?" Crystal asked. "Does he have training for interspecies interaction?" "Some," Sarah said, "but mostly Max just knows. Dogs are very good at reading emotions, even in species they've never met before. They can sense when someone is afraid or sad or happy, and they respond to those feelings." They reached a large observation deck where several dozen beings had gathered. This was one of the station's common areas, a place where species mingled and exchanged ideas. In the center of the room, a young Vorthian was sitting alone. Crystal recognized him immediately. It was Thelmer, a student from his own world who had come to the station to study. He had been struggling to adapt to life away from home. His eyes were dim, his posture slumped. Among Vorthians, these were signs of deep sadness. Max noticed Thelmer before anyone else did. Without any command from Sarah, the dog walked across the room and sat down beside the young Vorthian. Thelmer looked at the creature with surprise. Max simply leaned against him. That was all. The dog did not bark or jump or demand attention. It just sat there, pressing its warm body against Thelmer's side, offering its presence as a gift. Something changed in Thelmer's eyes. The dimness began to fade. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and touched the dog's fur. Max's tail wagged gently against the floor. He knows, Sarah said quietly to Crystal. Max knows that Thelmer is hurting and he wants to help. Crystal watched as Thelmer began to stroke the dog's fur. The young Vorthian's shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. A peace settled over his features that had not been there before. Why? Crystal asked. Why does the animal care about the well-being of a creature from another world? There is no benefit to the dog, no food reward, no survival advantage. Why does it offer comfort to a stranger? Sarah smiled, and Crystal saw that her eyes were wet with the moisture that humans produced when they felt strong emotions. Because that's what dogs do, she said. They love. It's not complicated for them. They don't need a reason. They just love. Crystal stood in silence, watching the dog and the young Vorthian together. In 3,000 years, he had seen many wonders. He had witnessed technologies that could reshape planets and weapons that could destroy stars. He had met beings of vast intelligence and incomprehensible power. But he had never seen anything as powerful as this small act of kindness from a creature that did not even speak. Word spread quickly through Station Prime. The human had brought a dog. Within hours, beings from every section of the station found reasons to visit the observation deck. They came with questions and curiosity. They came with skepticism and doubt. But mostly they came because they had heard the stories that had been circulating through the galaxy ever since humans first made contact. They had heard that Earth dogs were special. The Grommath were the first to approach Sarah formally. Their species was known for their strength and their stoic nature. They built the largest ships in the galaxy and mined the most dangerous asteroids. They did not show emotions easily, and they certainly did not show interest in small, furry creatures. But here was Gorthak, the chief engineer of Station Prime, nailing on the deck floor so that he could look at Max more closely. This animal has no claws, Gorthak observed. His voice was deep enough to vibrate the floor plates. No natural weapons, its teeth are small, it could not survive alone in the wild. Wild dogs exist on Earth, Sarah said, but you're right, domestic dogs like Max depend on humans, they trust us to care for them. And you do this? Gorthak asked. You feed and shelter and protect a creature that gives you nothing in return. Max gives me plenty in return, Sarah said. He gives me companionship, he gives me joy. When I come home after a hard day, he's always there, always happy to see me. That has value beyond measure. Gorthak reached out one massive hand and touched Max's fur. The dog did not flinch or pull away. He simply stood there, letting the giant alien examine him. It does not fear me, Gorthak said. There was wonder in his voice. Max doesn't judge by appearance, Sarah said. He judges by intention. He can tell that you mean him no harm. Gorthak made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell with Grommath. My people have no such creatures, he said. Our world was harsh. Everything that lived there fought for survival. There was no room for softness. Dogs started out as wolves, Sarah said. Wolves are not soft. They're hunters, pack animals, strong and fierce. But somewhere along the way, some of them decided that being our friends was better than being our competitors. They chose partnership over conflict. Gorthak withdrew his hand and stood to his full height, nearly 3 meters tall. I would like to learn more about these animals, he said. Perhaps they can teach the Grommath something we have forgotten. He walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing through the observation deck. Sarah looked down at Max, who was watching Gorthak leave with a tilted head. Good boy, she said softly. Over the following weeks, Max became something of a celebrity on Station Prime. Beings would stop Sarah in corridors just to say hello to the dog. Children of various species would ask permission to pet him. Even the most reserved and dignified ambassadors found excuses to visit the human quarters. Crystal watched all of this with growing fascination. He had spent his long life studying the behaviors of different species, trying to understand what made them similar and what made them unique. He had thought he understood the fundamental drives that motivated intelligent life: survival, reproduction, power, knowledge. But the dog represented something different, something that did not fit neatly into his categories. He visited Sarah one evening in her quarters. The room was modest by station standards, with a bed, a desk, and a small sitting area. Max lay on a soft pad near the bed, his head resting on his paws. When Crystal entered, the dog's tail began to wag, but he did not get up. "He knows you now," Sarah said. "He's greeting you, but he also knows you're not here for him. He can tell you want to talk to me." "How?" Crystal asked, settling into a chair that had been adjusted for his body shape. "How can he possibly know my intentions?" "Thousands of years of evolution," Sarah said. "Dogs evolved alongside humans. They learned to read our faces, our body language, our tone of voice, and somehow that ability extends to other species. Max might not understand your words, but he understands your emotions." Considered this, among Vorthians, emotional expression was subtle. They communicated much through scent and through tiny movements of their secondary eyes. He had assumed that other species could not read these signals. "Your Thelmer has visited 4 times this week," Sarah said. "Max looks forward to seeing him." "He is different now," Crystal admitted. "Less sad, he speaks more with the other students. He told me that the dog makes him feel less alone." "That's what dogs do best," Sarah said. "They make us feel connected. When you're with a dog, you're never truly alone." Leaned forward. "I must ask you something, Ambassador Chen, something that has been troubling me." "Please." "In my studies of your species, I have learned that humans form attachments to many things. You bond with machines, with places, with ideas. This is not unusual among intelligent species, but your attachment to dogs seems different, deeper. Why?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. She looked at Max, who raised his head slightly, sensing the shift in her mood. "Can I tell you a story?" she asked. "Please." "When I was 12 years old, my family lived in a region of Earth called the Pacific Northwest. It's very green there, lots of forests and rain. We had a dog named Biscuit. He was a mutt, a mix of different breeds. Not beautiful like Max here, but perfect to us." Max's ears perked at his name, then relaxed when Sarah continued speaking. "One day, I went hiking in the forest near our home. I thought I knew the trails, but I got lost. I walked for hours trying to find my way back. By the time it got dark, I was scared and cold and very far from home." "This must have been frightening for a young human," Crystal said. "It was terrifying, but then I heard something in the forest, barking. Biscuit had followed my scent for kilometers through the woods. When he found me, he sat right next to me and wouldn't leave. He kept me warm through the night, and in the morning, he led me back home." Sarah's eyes were wet again. "He didn't have to do that. He was a small dog and there were predators in those woods. He could have been killed, but he came anyway, because I was his family and his family was in danger." Felt something shift inside him. A new understanding began to form. "And this is common?" he asked. "This behavior among Earth dogs?" "There are thousands of stories like mine," Sarah said. "Dogs who have saved their humans from fires, from floods, from attacks. Dogs who have traveled hundreds of kilometers to find owners who moved away. Dogs who have stayed beside their humans even after death, refusing to leave their graves." "But why?" Crystal pressed. "What evolutionary purpose does such loyalty serve? Your dog gained nothing from saving you. The risk was too great, the reward too small. By pure logic, he should have stayed safe at home." Sarah smiled and reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. "That's the thing about dogs, Ambassador. They don't operate on logic, they operate on love, and love doesn't calculate risk and reward. Love just acts." Sat in silence for a long time, processing this information. "I have lived for 800 years, he finally said. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species destroy themselves through war and greed and fear. In all that time, I have come to believe that the universe is fundamentally cold, that survival is all that matters, that attachment is weakness." He looked at Max, who had closed his eyes again, content in the presence of his human. "But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps there is strength in attachment. Perhaps loyalty is not weakness but power." Sarah nodded slowly. Dogs have been teaching humans that lesson for 15,000 years. I'm glad we could share it with the galaxy. The turning point came 3 months after Sarah and Max arrived on Station Prime. A diplomatic crisis erupted between the Telaxi and the Silivics over mining rights in a contested system. Both species had valid claims under galactic law, both refused to compromise. Tensions rose quickly, trade agreements were suspended, military fleets were mobilized, messages between the two governments became increasingly hostile. Within a week, war seemed inevitable. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from all major species gathered in the Great Hall, a vast chamber designed to accommodate beings of every size and shape. The air was thick with tension and distrust. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Translators worked overtime trying to keep up with the accusations flying back and forth. Sarah was there as Earth's representative. Max sat beside her, his golden fur standing out against the sea of alien colors. The dog seemed uneasy, his ears flat against his head. He could sense the hostility in the room. The session did not go well. The Telaxi ambassador accused the Silivics of illegal mining operations and theft of resources. The Silivics ambassador responded with accusations of trade violations and territorial aggression. Voices rose, threats were made. Other species began to take sides and the Great Hall descended into chaos. Crystal watched with despair. He had seen conflicts like this before. He knew how they ended. Thousands would die, perhaps millions, and for what? A few asteroids rich in minerals that neither species truly needed. In the middle of the shouting, Max stood up. He walked away from Sarah's seat, crossing the floor of the Great Hall. Every eye turned to watch him. The arguing stopped. Even the most furious ambassadors fell silent as the small golden creature made his way across the room. Max approached the Silivics ambassador, a being named Crixlix who stood only slightly taller than the dog itself. Max sat down in front of Crixlix and looked up at her with his warm brown eyes. Then he did something that no one expected. He rolled onto his back, exposing his belly. Among dogs, this was a gesture of complete trust. It was the most vulnerable position a dog could take. It said, "I trust you not to hurt me." It said, "I am not your enemy." It said, "Look, we can be friends." Crixlix stared at the dog, her antennae quivered with confusion. In Silivic's culture, exposing one's vulnerable underside was considered either madness or the deepest form of submission. She did not understand what the creature was doing. "What is this creature doing?" she asked. Sarah stood from her seat but did not approach. She knew that this moment was not about her. "He's showing you that he trusts you," she said. "He knows you're upset. He knows there's conflict in this room, and he's trying to remind everyone that trust is still possible. He's asking you to be gentle." The hall was completely silent. Hundreds of beings watched as a small Earth dog lay vulnerable before an alien ambassador. Slowly, hesitantly, Crixlix reached down with one of her smaller arms and touched Max's belly. The dog's tail wagged against the floor, his tongue lolled out in a happy expression. Something shifted in Crixlix. She looked at the creature before her, this soft and helpless thing that had offered itself without fear. In her culture, trust was earned through strength and demonstrated through action. This was something different. This was trust offered freely, without conditions. From across the room, the Telaxi ambassador watched this exchange. His name was Dravenix, and he was known for his sharp temper and his skill at negotiation. He was not known for softness. He had been ready to go to war that very day, convinced that the Silivics could not be reasoned with. But something changed in his face as he watched the dog interact with his enemy. He crossed the floor to stand beside Crixlix. "Ambassador Chen," Dravenix said, "may I also interact with your companion?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. Dravenix knelt down beside Crixlix. Max rolled over and stood up, then looked at both ambassadors with his tongue hanging out in what could only be described as a smile. He pressed his head against Dravenix's hand, then turned and did the same to Crixlix. "The creature appears happy," Dravenix observed. His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Dogs are happiest when people get along," Sarah said. "They can sense conflict and it distresses them. They can also sense peace, and peace makes them joyful." Dravenix and Crixlix looked at each other. They had been enemies for months, unable to see past their grievances. but now, standing together over a small Earth dog who wanted nothing more than to see them be friends, something shifted. "Perhaps," Crixlick said slowly, "we could discuss this matter further, in private, without the shouting." Dravenix nodded. That would be acceptable. They left the Great Hall together, still not friends, but no longer quite enemies. The negotiations that followed took 3 weeks. They were difficult and complicated, with many moments where it seemed like everything would fall apart. But every time tensions rose too high, one of the ambassadors would remember the dog on the floor of the Great Hall, offering trust without condition. And they would find a way to continue. The war that had seemed inevitable never happened. The final agreement was signed in the same Great Hall where Max had made his gesture of trust. Both species made concessions. Both species gained something. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a peaceful one. At the signing ceremony, Crixlix asked if she could make a statement. "Before we sign this treaty," she said, "I wish to acknowledge something. 3 weeks ago, I came to this hall ready for war. I believed that the Telaxi could not be trusted, that peace was impossible, that conflict was inevitable." She paused and looked across the room to where Sarah sat with Max at her feet. "A small Earth creature changed my mind, not through words or arguments or threats, simply by trusting me, by showing me that vulnerability is not always weakness, by reminding me that peace begins with a choice to trust." She turned to face the assembled representatives. "I do not know if dogs understand what they do. Perhaps they are simply following their nature. But their nature has shown us something important. The galaxy does not have to be cold. We do not have to fear each other. We can choose to trust. We can choose peace." She signed the treaty. Dravenix followed, making a similar statement about the importance of the dog's intervention. And when the ceremony was over, both ambassadors knelt down to pet Max, who wagged his tail so hard that his whole body shook. News of what became known as the dog intervention spread rapidly through the galaxy. The story was told and retold, each version slightly different but the core always the same. A small Earth creature had reminded 2 warring species that trust was possible. Within a year, requests began flooding into Earth's embassies. Every species wanted to know more about dogs. They wanted to understand how such simple creatures could have such profound effects. And some of them wanted dogs of their own. The first formal request came from the Grometh. Chief Engineer Gorthak stood before the Galactic Council, his massive form filling the speaker's platform. "On behalf of my people," he said, "I formally request information on the acquisition of Earth dogs for the Grometh homeworld." A murmur went through the assembled representatives. "For what purpose?" asked Crixtal, who had become the primary advocate for understanding Earth creatures. Gorthak was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "My species has forgotten something important. We have become so focused on strength and work and productivity that we have lost touch with gentleness, with compassion, with the simple joy of companionship." He paused, his great hands clasped before him. "I believe these Earth dogs can teach us what we have forgotten. They can remind us that there is more to life than labor and survival." Similar requests came from the Telaxi, the Silavics, the Vorthians, and dozens of other species. Everyone wanted to understand the secret of Earth dogs. Everyone wanted to experience that unconditional love that humans spoke of so often. But there was a problem. "Dogs are not objects to be traded," Sarah explained to the council. "They are living beings with needs and feelings. We cannot simply ship them across the galaxy like cargo. Each dog requires proper care, attention, and most importantly, love. A dog that is not loved will suffer." "Then what do you propose?" Crixtal asked. Sarah took a deep breath. She had been preparing for this moment for months, working with Earth's government and animal welfare organizations to develop a plan. "We propose the creation of the Interspecies Companion Program," she said. "A joint initiative between Earth and any species that wishes to participate. We will teach you about dogs, not just how to care for them physically, but how to form real bonds with them. And in return, we hope you will teach us about your own companion species, if you have them." "Many species have no such creatures," Gorthak pointed out. "Not yet," Sarah said, "but that doesn't mean they never will. Evolution is not finished. Bonds are still forming across the galaxy. Perhaps somewhere on your world there is a creature waiting to become your companion. We can help you find it. we can help you learn to love. The council debated for days. Some species argued that this was cultural imperialism, an attempt by humans to impose their values on the galaxy. Others worried about the ecological impact of introducing Earth dogs to alien worlds. Still others questioned whether dogs could survive in environments so different from Earth. But in the end, the vote was unanimous in favor of the program. The galaxy wanted dogs. And more than that, the galaxy wanted what dogs represented. The galaxy wanted love. The Interspecies Companion Program began small. A handful of specially selected dogs were paired with alien families who had undergone extensive training. Each dog was chosen for its temperament, its health, and its ability to adapt to new environments. Each alien family was chosen for their genuine desire to form a bond, not just to possess an exotic creature. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. On the Gromath homeworld, a retired mining worker named Brechtel received a German shepherd named Duke. Brechtel had spent his entire life in the mines, working alone in darkness. He had never known companionship beyond brief interactions with coworkers. His family had died long ago, and he had resigned himself to spending his final years in solitude. When Duke arrived, Brechtel did not know what to do with the animal. The dog was small compared to him, fragile-looking, with fur that seemed impossibly soft. Brechtel was afraid he would hurt it simply by touching it. But Duke knew what to do with Brechtel. The dog followed the old Gromath everywhere. He sat beside him while he ate. He slept at the foot of his bed. He greeted him every morning with enthusiasm and joy, as if Brechtel were the most important being in the universe. At first, Brechtel was confused by this attention. What did he have to offer such a creature? He was old and worn and tired. He had nothing to give. But Duke did not want anything except his presence. Duke did not care that Brechtel was old or tired or alone. Duke just wanted to be with him. "I have lived for 200 years, Brechtel said in a video message sent to the program administrators. "I have mined asteroids and built ships. I have survived cave-ins and decompression events. I have done things that lesser Gromath would call heroic, but I have never felt truly valuable until this small creature looked at me with love in its eyes." On the Silivix colony world of Thrix Prime, a young female named Chitala received a beagle named Scout. Chitala had been born different from other Silivix. Her cluster instinct was weak and she preferred to spend time alone. This was considered a serious deficiency in Silivix society. Her family worried about her. Her teachers tried to correct her, but nothing worked. She was isolated, lonely, and increasingly depressed. Scout changed everything. The beagle did not care that Chitala was different. He did not judge her for wanting to be alone sometimes. He simply stayed with her, a constant presence that asked nothing but offered everything. When Chitala needed solitude, Scout would sit quietly beside her, not demanding attention but simply being there. When she felt ready for company, Scout was always enthusiastic and welcoming. He adapted to her needs in a way that no Silivix had ever managed to do. "Scout taught me that I was not broken," Chitala wrote in her application to become a program ambassador. "He taught me that being different is not the same as being wrong. His love did not have conditions, it simply existed. And in existing, it healed me. I am still different from other Silivix. I probably always will be, but I no longer feel alone." Story after story emerged from the program. Dogs healing trauma, dogs building bridges between estranged family members, dogs teaching patience to the impatient and courage to the fearful, dogs helping beings of all species through grief and loss and despair. And with each story, the galaxy's understanding of loyalty deepened. The Vorthians studied the phenomenon with scientific rigor. They conducted tests and gathered data and wrote papers with titles like Unconditional Positive Regard in Canis Familiaris, a cross-species analysis. They tried to explain the dog's loyalty in terms of evolution and psychology and neuroscience. But even the most rational Vorthian scientists had to admit that something about dogs transcended explanation. The data showed what dogs did, but it could not fully explain why. There was something in the dog's heart that resisted analysis, something that could only be felt, not measured. Was one of the scientists studying the phenomenon. He had been fascinated by dogs ever since his first encounter with Max, and he had devoted his considerable intellect to understanding them. One day, after months of research, he sat alone in his laboratory, surrounded by data and reports. He had learned everything there was to learn about dogs from a scientific perspective. He knew their biology, their behavior, their evolution. He could explain their loyalty in terms of pack bonding and domestication and selective breeding. But he still did not understand. He called Sarah Chen. "I have studied your dogs for months," he said. "I have learned everything about them, but I still do not understand why they love the way they do." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Maybe that's because love isn't something you understand with your mind, it's something you understand with your heart." "Vorthians do not speak of hearts in this way," Crystal said. "Maybe it's time you learned," Sarah replied. She suggested something radical. She suggested that Crystal adopt a dog of his own. Crystal was hesitant. He was a scientist and observer. He did not form attachments easily. He was not sure he was capable of the kind of love that dogs required. But he was curious, and curiosity had always been his greatest weakness and his greatest strength. He agreed. The dog they chose for him was a small terrier named Pixel. She had wiry fur and bright eyes and an energy that seemed boundless. She was nothing like the dignified, reserved Vorthian ideal. She was chaos and joy compressed into a tiny body. From the moment Pixel arrived, Crystal's orderly life was turned upside down. The dog wanted to play when he wanted to work. She wanted attention when he wanted solitude. She knocked things over and made messes and generally behaved in ways that Vorthians would consider undignified. At first, Crystal was frustrated. He did not understand this creature. He did not know how to be what she needed. But Pixel did not give up on him. She kept trying, kept offering her love, kept waiting for him to understand. And slowly he did. He learned to take breaks from his work to play with her. He learned to laugh at her antics instead of being frustrated by them. He learned that disorder was not always bad, that sometimes chaos could be joyful. And he learned what it meant to be loved unconditionally. One evening, Crystal sat in his quarters with Pixel curled up on his lap. The dog was sleeping, her small body warm against him. He looked down at her and felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt at home. 5 years after the program began, Ambassador Crystal called a special session of the Galactic Council. He was very old now, even by Vorthian standards. His time was limited, but there was something important he needed to say. "In my many centuries of life," he began, "I have studied countless species. I have cataloged their behaviors, their societies, their values. I have always believed that intelligence was the highest measure of a species' worth, that knowledge and power determined a species' place in the cosmos." He paused, gathering his strength. Pixel sat at his feet, watching him with alert eyes. "I was wrong." A murmur went through the council. "The humans brought us their dogs, simple creatures by our standards, no technology, no language, no complex civilization. And yet these animals have taught us more about what truly matters than all the libraries of the galaxy combined." Crystal gestured and an image appeared on the great screen behind him. It was a photograph from the program archives, a Gromath child sitting in a field of alien flowers, arms wrapped around a golden retriever, both of them smiling. "This is what matters," Crystal said. "Not power, not knowledge, not even survival. What matters is connection. What matters is love. The dogs understand this instinctively. They do not need philosophy or religion or science to tell them how to live. They simply love wholly and without reservation." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from 100 different worlds. "I propose that we adopt Earth dogs as the official symbol of the Galactic Council. Not because they are superior to other creatures, but because they represent something we should all strive for. They represent loyalty. They represent unconditional acceptance. They represent the best of what any species can be." The vote was not unanimous. Some species still harbored reservations. Some felt that elevating Earth creatures above all others was unfair. But the majority agreed. Earth dogs became the official symbol of loyalty for the Galactic Council. And across the known universe, beings of every size and shape began to understand what humans had known for 15,000 years, that sometimes the smallest creatures have the biggest hearts. The years that followed saw changes that no one had anticipated. The interspecies companion program expanded beyond dogs. Other Earth animals were introduced to alien worlds, cats, horses, rabbits, and more. And alien species began finding their own companion creatures, forming new bonds that would last for generations. The Gromath discovered a small burrowing creature on their world that they had always dismissed as vermin. But when a young Gromath child befriended one, they realized that these creatures had potential. With careful nurturing and selective breeding, the Gromath developed their own companion species, the Grommer, a six-legged creature with soft fur and a gentle disposition. The Telaxi, whose world was mostly ocean, formed bonds with a species of intelligent fish that communicated through color changes. The relationship was different from the human-dog bond, but it was no less meaningful. Even the Vorthians, the most ancient and reserved of species, began to open themselves to companionship. Many followed Crixtal's example and adopted dogs. Others found companions among their own world's creatures. The galaxy was changing, not because of new technology or political treaties or military conquests. It was changing because of love. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Station Prime, watching the stars. Max sat beside her, his muzzle gray now with age, but his eyes still bright with love. 10 years had passed since they first arrived. So much had changed, and yet some things remained constant. The stars still burned, the station still turned, and Max was still by her side. "You did this," Sarah whispered to Max. "You and all the dogs who came before you. You changed the galaxy." Max looked up at her and wagged his tail. He didn't understand the words. He didn't know about galactic politics or interspecies programs or diplomatic achievements. All he knew was that his human was beside him, and that was enough. That was everything. Sarah knelt down and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. She breathed in his familiar scent and felt his warmth against her. "Good boy," she said, "such a good boy." And somewhere across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, other beings were saying the same thing to their own dogs in their own languages with their own tears of joy. The Earth dogs had done what no technology or weapon or treaty could ever do. They had taught the universe how to love. Passed away 3 years later, peacefully in his sleep with Pixel curled up beside him, his last words, recorded for posterity, were simple: "The dog is here, I am not alone." At his memorial service, attended by representatives from across the galaxy, Sarah spoke about what Crixtal had meant to the Interspecies Companion Program. "He was the first to truly understand," she said. "Not with his mind, but with his heart. He showed us that even the oldest and wisest among us have something to learn, and he showed us that it's never too late to open yourself to love." Pixel sat at Sarah's feet during the service, looking around at the gathered mourners. She did not understand death, not in the way that intelligent beings understood it, but she knew that her Vorthian was gone and she was sad. After the service, Pixel went to live with Thelmer, the young Vorthian who had first been comforted by Max all those years ago. Thelmer was no longer young now, but he remembered what Max had given him, and he wanted to pass that gift along. And so the cycle continued, dogs being loved and giving love in return, beings of all species learning what it meant to be loyal, to be devoted, to care for another creature without asking anything in return. 200 years later, students in schools across the galaxy learned about the companion revolution. They studied how a single species bond with a simple four-legged creature had transformed interstellar relations. They memorized the names of the first dogs to travel to alien worlds: Max, Duke, Scout, Pixel, and dozens of others. But more importantly, they learned the lesson that those dogs had taught. Loyalty is not weakness, love is not foolishness. The bonds we form with others are not burdens but gifts. And when those students graduated and took their places in the galaxy, they carried those lessons with them. Some became diplomats who resolved conflicts with patience and trust. Some became scientists who studied the nature of love and companionship. Some became engineers who built bridges instead of walls. Some became parents who raised their children to value connection above all else. And many of them went home at the end of each day to a creature that greeted them with joy, a creature that asked for nothing but love and gave everything in return. The dog, the standard for loyalty across every known alien species. Not because of what dogs could do, but because of what dogs inspired others to become. Humans had given the galaxy many things: technology, art, ideas, dreams, but the greatest gift they ever gave was a simple one, a creature with 4 legs and a wagging tail, a creature that loved without condition and trusted without fear. Earth dogs had become the standard for loyalty, not because they were perfect, but because they showed what was possible. They showed that even in a cold and vast universe, warmth and connection could exist. They showed that love was not a weakness to be overcome but a strength to be celebrated. And as the centuries passed and civilizations rose and fell and new species joined the galactic community, the lesson of the dogs remained. Carved into the foundation of the Galactic Council building in 100 different languages were the words that Sarah Chen had spoken so many years ago. They don't need a reason, they just love. It was the simplest truth in the universe. And it had changed everything.